What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some 2026 impressions for Middle-earth Shadow of War, sequel to Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, which takes a bunch of the systems and expands them, and after reviewing the original one after some time playing it way back when, it made sense to eventually get around to the sequel here, and this is the next older game I plan on reviewing. And yet, in the case of Shadow of War here, there are some things that have changed and some things that have stayed the same since I played it last in 2018, with the game itself originally releasing back in 2017. And I would really say that's where most of the impressions come from, but in terms of what I've personally experienced previously, back before they made some important changes even, I had played through the entire original campaign, including the Shadow War part of it, which was notoriously very long-winded, prior to, I believe, some nerfs or something to the way the loot box system they had set up worked that no longer really exists. And then I played through the first DLC, where you play as Eltariel, and then I never really messed around with the Desolation of Mordor DLC, which is where pretty much all the new content of this game will be for me, because I've never seen that stuff. And so going into this, what I have left to do before I review it fully is going to be a couple of things I left out of the base game, just a random achievement or two here and there, some multiplayer stuff in the same vein, as well as the Desolation of Mordor DLC. So I'm going to run back through it again and kind of see the stuff that I missed, play the new DLC, etc. But before I can ever get to that, I'm going to have to review a couple of other games, new releases first. This will be up next after the fact, and I wanted to just kind of get everything organized and ready to go for this ahead of time. Either way, though, by far the biggest change to this game since I last played it was the removal of the loot box system that was added in with the original release. So, as with Shadow of Mordor, what you're going to go and do is go around and recruit a bunch of orcs and stuff, captains, things like that, in order to fight in your army as you take on like actual sieges and stuff this time around. The problem being that the loot boxes were things that would give you like certain orc followers and stuff, and it was by far and away the best way to acquire those things, and what you essentially got was you would either pay for the convenience, or you would have to grind for much longer in order to get through the game, and see the actual ending, thanks to the ending sort of chapter, the Shadow War, being extremely long if you chose not to do that. In fact, I can attest to that because I did the Shadow War without doing those loot boxes, and it took some time. Now, what remains of that system these days is actually your garrison still. So the loot boxes were eventually removed in late 2018, I believe, and then they did move some of that stuff to just things you could do in normal gameplay, which is why the game should be easier these days in terms of stuff like the Shadow War, because that stuff's just not in there anymore. Or at least the Shadow War doesn't take as long, I should say. However, what is still here is stuff like the online components. That's noteworthy because Shadow of Mordor actually shut the online components of that game down and moved it fully single player, and so while you can still do everything, it's just a completely single player experience now, whereas Shadow of War still has some of those online components and things that I'll have to finish up for the review itself and kind of remember how all of that works. Now, in every other way, Shadow of War was a really big expansion on the somewhat notorious at this point Nemesis system, a system by which all of the orcs and everything became these incredibly unique foes or perhaps friends via the domination system, and you could turn them against each other and really lean into that. Well, Shadow of War cranks all of that up to 11, adding tons of ways that the orcs and stuff can be different. If they're even orcs, you can also pick up like Ologs now, and then your own powers got expanded. There are drakes later in the game that you can fly around on. As I mentioned, there are going to be like full-on siege battles, which will be fun as I recall. But even just beyond the Nemesis system, they also expanded upon a lot of other features as well. Like for instance, the gear system now. There's a lot more gear and ways to customize it. There's like little set bonuses and stuff, I believe, these days. And coincidentally, that should be a little easier for me as well because, as I mentioned, the garrison where all this stuff was stored is still around, so you can still have orc followers and the like, and you can pick up training orders to order them to your garrison, which is basically like a reserve force. The garrison transfers between playthroughs if you choose to delete yours and start over, which is what I'm doing here, and so I'll have that sort of contingent of orc followers to just deploy into the battlefield straight away, and the garrison is kind of what is left of that original system, and thanks to things like the experience experience boosts and stuff that were part of that still hanging around, it should go relatively quick for me to jump back into all of this stuff once I can give it my full attention. But on one hand, while there are plenty of places that this game expanded upon Shadow of Mordor, and in that way it's probably going to be better across the board for a substantial amount of people, there's still a few other things worth noting. Like, for instance, there are some problems, I would say, from Shadow of Mordor that Shadow of War doesn't do much to address or anything. Like, for instance, the constant interruptions by like orc captains jumping into conversations as you are potentially trying to fight several of them in a siege. And while combat and, things with the Nemesis system are fun, it is, eventually going to get a little stale in terms of just, repeating the same stuff over and over again, basically breaking up the orc bands and tribes and stuff you will come across, turning them against each other, and then taking on the local stronghold, while hopefully exploiting the different weaknesses of the orcs and war chiefs you will have learned about along the way. So, long story short, I suppose, Shadow of War is great if you liked the original game, because it takes all of those systems, expands upon them, and nowadays that they have all of the loot box and microtransaction nonsense pulled out of it as well, all of which, of course, being set against the backdrop of the sort of shadow war against Sauron himself as you pull all of these armies, cause all of this chaos, overtake these forts and stuff, in order to grind Sauron to a standstill while the events of the rest of the franchise take place. And while obviously none of this is really canon in any sense, it is still pretty fun. And I'm looking forward to jumping back into it and playing it in full. And as far as impressions in this day and age goes, that is pretty much where I'm at. So it'll be fun to play through this game again, not just for the things it does well, but also because this time around I won't have to deal with the microtransactions and stuff. I'll get to see the content that I didn't see the first time around, like Desolation of Mordor, and see how much that holds up against my memory of playing it about 8 years ago or so. But as for today, I do think that is pretty much going to do it. Mostly I just wanted to use this video to set the stage for the upcoming review once I get some of the new release stuff I got to do over the next couple of weeks out of the way. But I certainly hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you're looking forward to the review. In the meantime, however, feel free to let me know all about it down in the comment section below, which of course means to like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.